Hello everyone, welcome back to Slow Academy, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how to use Cubase like FL-Studio. But before we proceed, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button, also the notification bell, so that you get notified whenever we drop new videos. And if you like this video, please give it a thumb up and comment below if there is any other things you want us to explain. The first thing we want to talk about is the interface. Let's look at the interface of the Fruity Loops Studio. Here we have the channel rack and we have the browser window, okay? And you have what we call the playlist at the top, and we have the mixer, okay? You can bring up any of this view by hiding or showing them. For example, you can hide and show the channel rack. You can hide and show the browser. Likewise, you can hide and show all the views. Okay, let's quickly look at the Cubase. In the Cubase, you have the project zone. This project zone can be seen to be the playlist of the Fruity Loops and the channel rack all together. And the mixer view, just exactly like the mixer on the Fruity Loops Studio. The major difference you notice here is that while the playlist and the channel rack are separated in Fruity Loops Studio, the playlist and the channel rack are together in the Cubase and any other DAW. What makes the Fruity Loops unique is channel rack, which make it very easy for music producer to make sequence. This will make music producer to prefer making beat on Fruity Loops rather than making beat on Cubase. The channel rack make it so easy to sequence on Fruity Loops. But you have all together represented by the project zone on Cubase and any other DAW you might think about: Pro Tools, Logic, Sonar, Studio One. Another difference is that on Fruity Loops, you have all your tracks set on the playlist. Here you have about 500 tracks. But in Cubase, you have none. You might have few of them in other DAWs like Pro Tools, Logic, Studio One, and some will give you none. What you need to do is to add track manually. Okay, let's talk about audio configuration. In Fruity Loops Studio, to configure your audio interface and your MIDI devices, go to Options and either the MIDI settings or the audio settings. You'll be presented by the same box, which you can switch between MIDI and the audio. Here you can select your interface, your audio interface, and under the MIDI you can select your MIDI interface if it is connected. Let's quickly connect one. I have the code 14M audio here, and I can just enable them to start working. I can enable and disable. Let's quickly look at Cubase. To configure the audio interface and the MIDI interface, you simply go to the Studio and Studio Setup. In the studio setup dialog, you can select your audio interface, and under the MIDI port setup, you can as well find your MIDI controllers. So just like the FL-Studio MIDI configuration, you have similar thing in the Cubase studio setup. All you need to do is to select your MIDI controller and make sure it is active. Just like in FL-Studio, that you need to select the MIDI controller and enable. Similar thing on the Cubase, you need to make sure the MIDI controller is active. Okay. Then let's talk about the project setup. You need to go to the project, then project setup. In the project setup is where you can set the sample rate that you will be recording with. This is where you set the sample rate you will be recording with, the bit depth, and the format you are recording. Let's look at FL-Studio. In FL-Studio, the audio configuration and the project setup is combined on one page. This is where you can set your sample rate. Okay, let's talk about the project zone. Cubase has 4 major zones: the left zone, the right zone, the lower zone, and the project zone. Where you are currently is the project zone, and the project zone cannot be hidden, unlike the left zone, the right zone, and the lower zone. Now let's take a look at Fruity Loop Studio. In FL-Studio project window, you have just 2, the left and the project zone. On the left zone, you have 3 tabs. The first tab is the pattern tab. The next one is the audio clips tab. And the next one is the automation clips tab. All the pattern you create in channel rack are arranged in the pattern tab, while the audio clips you dragged into FL will be organized under the audio clips tab. All the automation drawn will be arranged under the automation tab. So FL-Studio has properly organized all these things. Let's quickly take a look at Cubase. In Cubase, everything is positioned in the project window. That is, your patterns, your audio clips, your automation are all created in the project window. It is now left for you to properly organize all these things. This means after creating an audio track, you can create an instrument track or a MIDI track. And after that, you can make another audio track. There is no arrangement to this, except you manually arranged them. Let's take a look at Fruity Loop Studio. On FL-Studio Mixer, you have left zone, middle zone, and right zone. This will enable you to arrange some dedicated tracks in order for you not to mix them up with other regular tracks. In this case, I've made track 120 to 123 an auxiliary tracks, while track 124 and 25 group track. To add any of these tracks at the middle to the auxiliary track, I will simply right click on the track and go to Dock to, either to the right or to the left. Let's make this go to the right. Here we are. We can decide to rename by right clicking on this track rename or pressing the shortcut F2 on the Windows key. We can type a name, compressor, and we can decide to give it a color to make it different. Press enter. This is now an auxiliary track. I can decide to create more groups or bus tracks by selecting, holding down Ctrl key, 21 and 22, right click and dock to the left. You can then rename following the same step. Let's call this brass. This might be the brass bus channel. And we can do the same thing to the second track. But now let's decide to return the second track to the middle zone. Right click, dock to middle. Why do we need to do this docking? When you are scrolling along in the middle zone, the left and right tracks will not be moving along with other tracks. This will allow you to focus on any track at the middle zone while you are still working on the auxiliary channels or on the bus channels. To apply an auxiliary effect on any of this track, select the track you want to apply the auxiliary effect to, then right click on the effect you decide to use, select sidechain to this track. The amount of the effect you are applying on track 60 will depend on the level you apply here. Assuming you have a piano sound routed to this track and you want to route it to the string bus, you make sure piano track is selected. Go to the string bus track, right click on this up arrow and select route to this track. Now piano track has been routed to both the string bus track and the master bus track. This is not your intention. What we want to do is to route the piano to the strings and the strings route to the master. So we select the piano track, right click on this little arrow under the string. Instead of selecting route to this track, we will pick route to this track only. This will disconnect this track away from the master track, but only to the strings bus track. Then the strings send the signal to the master. Let's look at the operation in Cubase. In Cubase project window, you have the zonings left, right, and the lower zone. Similarly, on the mixer, you have the left zone and the right zone, but without the lower zone. This is very similar to the FL-Studio mixer. But in this case, the left zone and the right zone are not meant for the same purpose that the FL-Studio mixer is meant for. Let us look at the transport bar. On Cubase, the transport bar is located below the project window. This is where you can see the circle, stop, play, record, the metronome, the tempo, and some other transport functions. On FL-Studio, the transport is located at the very top or very bottom of the page, depending on the version of FL-Studio you are using. Since FL-Studio separated the channel rack from the playlist, then you can switch to play from the pattern or to play from the playlist. Switch between pattern and song playlist. You also have the stop and the record, the tempo, and the metronome. On Cubase, to add an audio track or instrument track, the plus sign button here, we can add either the audio, instrument or sampler or MIDI track, and from all the numerous tracks we can add, or we right click on an empty area of this part and add the track we wish to add, or we can simply go to project and select add track. Any of this track added will all be placed in the project window. Unlike FL-Studio that properly arrange these things in different tabs. To add an instrument to FL-Studio, you have to be thinking about the channel rack. Hit the plus sign, select the instrument you wish to add, and that is it. Now anything you play on this instrument will be positioned on the pattern you are currently on. Let's go to pattern 1. You can add more patterns by clicking on the plus sign here after you have exhausted one. These patterns are like pages. Now, when you play anything in the FL keys, it automatically appears on the playlist. Now you have pattern 1. You can rename it as piano. And this piano can then be placed in the playlist and arrange them accordingly. This is how you apply instrument on FL-Studio. What if you are using an audio clip? You can drag your audio clip from your browser and drag it straight into the playlist. This will automatically be arranged and placed under the audio tab, while the patterns will be placed under the pattern tab. You can see when you create any automation, it's going to be placed under the automation tab. Let's observe the Cubase. In Cubase, every track you create in the project window will automatically be connected to the mixer. Audio 1, Audio 2, MIDI ground, stereo out. Audio 1, Audio 2, MIDI ground. Then you have your stereo out. If you create more tracks, then more tracks will appear on the mixer. This is not the same with FL-Studio. In FL-Studio, you will need to manually route these instruments to the mixer. The mixer has various channels. Now, for example, I want to add the FL keys to channel number 5 on the mixer. Let's right click on this and remove the sampler. Then set this to number 5. The number here will be the number of the mixer track you have connected this instrument to. Let's look at the mixer. The piano is now on track number 5. Now you can rename this as piano. Let's add more instruments. And connect this instrument to the mixer. Instead of sending it to a mixer track, then renaming, you can simply select the instrument, which is morphing, and press Ctrl L on the keyboard. This will automatically route this instrument to any available channel on the mixer. Let's look at the mixer. On the mixer, you have track 1, morphing. The name has already appeared on the track, so you don't need to manually rename. Morphing is now on track 1. When we want to create an automation, for example, volume automation, with this instrument. Let's place something in it. Okay, we can rename this as synth. Okay, let's try to add an automation. Right click on the volume and say create automation clip. So when we are creating a volume automation clip for this, the automation clip will appear under the automation tab, the audio under the audio tab, and the pattern under the pattern tab. Unlike Cubase, when you record an audio, okay, assuming that was a recording, or record an instrument, you can decide to write an automation for this clip, just as we did on FL-Studio. Let's write an automation for this by selecting this little drop-down arrow. The volume automation, let's activate the read. And then we can write our automation, just as we did on FL-Studio. Everything, both the audio, the automation, and the instrument are all arranged in the project window. Zooming in Cubase and FL are similar. Hold down the Control key and screw on your mouse. Just like the FL-Studio, hold down the Control key and screw on the mouse. Though there are shortcuts to this that might make a difference between FL-Studio and Cubase, but at least they have similar things going on. Let's look at the tools. You have the snap to grid, you have the draw tool, the paint tool, the delete tool, the mute tool, the slip tool, the slice tool, the select tool, the zoom tool, and the playback tool. The draw can be used to paste pattern in the playlist, while also the paint can be used to paint pattern on the playlist. Right click to remove those clips. Instead of deleting, you can decide to mute any of these clips. Slip can be used to change the position of the notes in any clips without affecting the other clips. Slice is used to slice, just as the name implies. Then you can delete. Select, just as the name implies, can be used to select multiple clips. Zoom can be used to focus on a particular area, while the playback can be used to preview a particular clip. But most of this can be accessed with shortcuts. For example, to delete any of this clip, just right click on it. To select any of the clip, hold down the Control key and select, or hold down the Control and drag over. To zoom, hold down the Control and screw the mouse. Similarly, on Cubase, the tools are placed on the tools bar, just above the project window. You have the object selection tool, you have the range selection tool, the draw tool, the erase tool, which is similar to the delete tool on FL, You have the split tool, which is similar to the slice tool on FL. You have the glue tool to join two clips together. You have the move tool, which is similar to the same move tool on the FL-Studio. You have the zoom tool. You have the comp tool. You have time wrap. You have line tool, which is similar to the draw tool. Then you have the play tool, which is similar to the playback tool on FL-Studio. You have the color tool also. You have the snap to grid, just as you have all these tools on FL-Studio. So what you do on the channel rack on FL-Studio, adding instruments, samples, and every other tool needed to make sequence. On the channel rack, this is the step sequencer, which you can use to sequence beats. The step sequencer make it easy for music producer to quickly make the sound they have on mind by selecting the bosses, click to apply note, right click to remove note. The step sequencer is missing on Cubase. The only thing that is available on Cubase is the piano roll. Clicking on this button will switch the channel rack between the playlist and the piano roll. Now let's click on any of these instruments to enter into the piano roll. This is the piano roll where you can apply notes. This is very similar to what you have going on Cubase, where you can also draw notes. The piano roll can be maximized by clicking on this button to open on separate window. Then you can find it more convenient to work in the piano roll. Thank you for your time, and please remember to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so that you can get notified whenever we drop new videos. And if you like this video, please give it a thumb up and comment below any questions or any other thing you wish we talk about. We love your thumb up and we love your comments.